Number 10. Adrian Carton de WIART. Over the course of 6 decades and 4 wars, Adrian Carton de WIART survived the impossible multiple times. He's considered one of the most dedicated soldiers of all time because, well, for starters, after he lost his left hand and his left eye, Adrian did not retire. In fact, the British Army officer went on to experience 10 more horrible injuries afterwards. As World War I broke out in November 1914, Carton was serving with the Somalian Camel Corps, opposing the forces of the Dervish state. Now, he was shot in the arm and face, and that's how he lost his left eye, but a grim detail shared by Lord Ismay, who served alongside the soldier, said in 1964 that the doctor at the time couldn't do anything about his eye, so he must have been in pure agony during all of this. Lord Ismay continues to believe that losing his eyes was actually a blessing in disguise, because the incident allowed for Adrian to relocate to Europe, where even more action was waiting. He received more gunshot wounds in the head, hand, stomach, groin, leg, and ankle, and if that's not inspiring enough, he survived numerous plane crashes and a broken back.
In our number 9 spot today, we have Gregorio del Pilar. Gregorio was a general of the Philippine Revolutionary Army during the Philippine-American War and is known for being one of the youngest generals in the Revolutionary Army at the young age of just 22 years old. He was nicknamed Boy General and was also known for being quite a ladies' man. In 1896, Gregorio finished his Bachelor of Arts and was going on to complete more education, but when the revolution broke out, he enlisted himself for military service. In 1899, the Americans were advancing on the Tirad Pass, and this is the battle that unfortunately was Gregorio's last. While his last spoken words weren't recorded, it was his final diary entry that I want to talk about today. His final entry read, "The general has given me the pick of all the men that can be spared and ordered me to defend the pass. I realize what a terrible task has been given to me, and yet I felt that this is the most glorious moment of my life. What I do is done for my beloved country. No sacrifice can be too great." It obviously shows how incredibly dedicated he was to his country, and perhaps he had some sort of inkling that this battle just may be his last. At the end of the day, his legacy certainly lives on. In our number 8 spot today, we have Neil Tony Downs. Neil Downs was killed in Afghanistan on June 9th, 2007, while he was a part of the 1st Battalion Guards. His final words are coming from a letter that he had written to his girlfriend before his passing, and you guys, it is just absolutely heart-wrenching. He wrote, "Jane, I hope you have a wonderful and fulfilling life. Get married, have children, etc. I will love you forever and will see you again when you are old and wrinkly. I have told my parents to leave you some money out of my insurance, so have fun, babe. Okay, gonna go now, beautiful. Love you forever. Tony, XXX." Any letter left to family before someone passes is incredibly hard to read, but there is something that is just so terrifying and sad when those words reflect that they knew that the end was near. To end this one on a happier note, in the letter he also wrote about how he bets his lottery numbers will get picked now, which made me laugh through the tears I had the first time I was reading the letter. In our number 7 spot today, we have Henri de la Tour d'Auvergne. I'm so sorry to any French people watching this. Henri was a French general who has gone down in history as one of the greatest military commanders in modern history. During the Dutch War in the summer campaign in Salzburg on July 27, 1675, Henri was struck by one of the first shots. I believe it was also a cannonball, so it was most definitely not a good scene. He laid on the ground, barely able to breathe when he uttered his last words, which were, "I did not mean to be killed today." Aside from that being very honest, it's also quite sad. I always like to picture people's final moments as peaceful or just hope that they have no idea what is happening, but this was of course not the case for him. After his passing, when his death was announced, people all over were mourning the loss as he was an incredibly well-respected man. In our number 6 spot today, we have Thomas Jonathan Jackson. General Thomas Jonathan Jackson is much better known by his nickname Stonewall Jackson. He was a Confederate general during the American Civil War and is one of the most well-known commanders there has ever been, as he had quite a significant role in winning a lot of the most famous battles. Now, in 2021, he certainly has a slightly controversial past, but we will save that for another video. After the Battle of Chancellorsville, Stonewall ended up being mistakenly shot in the left arm twice and once in the right hand. This led to his left arm being amputated, but the medical struggles did not end there. He ended up developing signs of pneumonia, but the doctors didn't catch the signs in time. On May 10th, 1863, just a short 8 days after he was shot, he ended up passing away from his his pneumonia. Before he passed, his doctor recorded his last words. He was very weak, but he managed to utter the sweet words, "Let us cross the river and rest under the shade of the trees." This is not dark like the other ones on this list, but it sure is memorable. In our number 5 spot today, we have Maynard L. Beamsturfer, whose nickname was Beamy. Beamy was a World War II hero who luckily went on to live a very long life after his duty was over. He ended up passing away at the age of 92, and really, who could be upset at making it that far in life, especially when you survived such a high-risk job? He passed away in 2016 and was thankfully surrounded by his family. His final words spoken to his family were, "Did I do good?" I think that this is both very sweet and quite sad at the same time. It's wonderful that he was able to be around family, and I am certain they assured him that he did in fact do good. I hope in his final moments he really did feel proud of himself, and I hope that while he was slipping away, he knew the answer to his question. In our number 4 spot today, we have Avo Manula. Major Avo Manula was a Finnish soldier who was a pilot and was part of the Air Force. His last day was on May 17th, 1944, and he went out with quite a story. Apparently, he was about to go out for a rehearsal flight, but his usual plane wasn't available, so he told his staff sergeant that he would take his plane. His staff sergeant replied that the plane was a little weird to fly and that you had to know its quirks and that he should just take another plane instead. Well, he didn't listen to this for some reason and responded to the sergeant with the words, "Is Sergeant attempting to teach me how to fly?" And then he went off and took the plane out. It was during this flight that the aircraft went into a spin, and then there was not enough altitude, so he ended up crashing into the lake, where he unfortunately passed away. It is so upsetting that this whole thing most definitely could have been avoided if he just listened to his sergeant that day. In our number 3 spot today, we have Alexander DECOTEAU. Alexander DECOTEAU was a Cree athlete who became the first Indigenous police officer in Canada in 1911 before he joined the Canadian Expeditionary Force in April of 1915. He sadly ended up passing away in battle in 1917. And while his last spoken words weren't recorded, I do have his last words from his final letter to his sister. He wrote, "Well, sis, remember me to Dave and the children. I do hope to see you all before long, if only for a little while. Be good to yourself and don't work too hard. As ever, your loving brother, Alex." As someone with a lot of brothers, this one just really got me straight in the heart, you guys. I'm so glad that his final letter to her got to end on such a sweet note, and I'm sure it is something that she always cherished. In our number 2 spot today, we have SANADA YUKIMURA. During the Warring States period in Japan, there was one incredibly famous samurai warrior. SANADA YUKIMURA was an incredible fighter and is best known for being the leading general on the defending side of the siege of Osaka. SANADA is known as a hero and has even been called the #1 hero in Japan. Unfortunately, the summer siege of Osaka Castle was his last and where his haunting words come from. He ended up being mortally struck, and this is when he stumbled out onto the field while removing his helmet. This is when he said the words, "I am SANADA, no doubt an adversary quite worthy of you, but I am exhausted and can fight no longer. Go on, take my head as your trophy." These truly might be some of the coolest last words ever, and that is sincerely a reflection of the type of warrior he was. In our number 1 spot today, we have Jan Žižka. Jan Žižka is a hero in Czech and was lovingly nicknamed One-Eyed Žižka after he lost one and then both of his eyes during battle. He is still regarded as one of the most prominent military leaders despite living so long ago, which certainly is quite a legacy. There was quite a bit of time during his life where he and his men were fighting against King Sigismund, who was the king of Bohemia. Jan didn't end up passing away in battle, however. He actually died of the plague in 1492. After his passing, his men called themselves orphans because they said it felt like they had lost their father. And if that doesn't speak to the kind of leader he was, this next bit definitely will. It has been recorded that his last words were, "Make my skin into drumheads for the Bohemian cause." While kind of gross in thought, I think it definitely shows his commitment and passion in how he wanted to lead his men into battle any way he could, even after passing. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Ira P. Woodruff. Ira P. Woodruff was a second lieutenant in the Confederate Army during the Civil War. He ended up passing away during the Battle of Seven Pines on May 31st of 1862. His last words during this battle weren't recorded, but what was recorded was one of his last letters to his family, which I think is a pretty great choice to remember some of his final words. Close to the end of the letter read, "When that dear land shall be polluted by the filthy tread of our enemies, armies that are now waging an unjust war upon us. I hope that it will take place after my remains sleep in the lonesome grave of the soldier. If it should ever fall to my lot to face the instruments of death, where perhaps cannonballs may rain around me, I shall think of my own sweet friends that I have left behind me. It is always so haunting to hear the final words of somebody to their family, and it really just reminds you of the sacrifice some people have made. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far. In our number 9 spot today, we have Pompey the Great. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far, because it really helps us out. Pompey the Great is the oldest person on this list, as he was born in 106 BC and passed away in 48 BC at the age of 57. Pompey was a Roman general, and his career played a significant role in the evolution from a republic to an empire. At one point, he was an ally of Julius Caesar, but they became enemies, and this is what led to Pompey's death. In 48 BC, there was a civil war in which Caesar beat Pompey's army, and Pompey began to retreat to Egypt. Once he got there, he hoped that King Ptolemy would help him, but unfortunately the king feared Caesar, so instead the king invited him ashore at Pelusium, and it was there that Pompey was assassinated. Pompey's final words were to one of the assassins, and it seems as though Pompey recognized him. He said, "I am not mistaken, surely, in believing you to have been formerly my fellow soldier. Certainly being assassinated is never good, but by people you know and possibly trusted is definitely quite a dark twist." In our number 8 spot today, we have Sir Philip Sidney. Sir Philip Sidney was born in November of 1554 and was an English poet and soldier, and is one of the most prominent figures of the Elizabethan era. In 1586, he joined Sir John Norris in the Battle of Zutphen. Sorry if I said that wrong, in the fight against the Spanish, but it was during this battle that he was shot in the thigh, which would ultimately lead to his death. One of the most well-known stories about Sir Philip Sidney is when he was laying wounded next to another soldier who was also wounded. He spoke his last words to the other soldier when he was giving him his water. He said, "Take it. Thy need is greater than mine." It seems as though he must have known he was about to pass, but it also shows the kind of person he was, which seems to be a very noble person. He certainly left a legacy, considering we are still here talking about him today. In our number 7 spot today, we have Joachim Murat. Joachim Murat was a marshal of the empire and an admiral to Napoleon, and he was also the king of Naples from 1808 to 1815. A lot of people attribute his titles to the fact that he actually married Napoleon's younger sister, Caroline Bonaparte, but he is also remembered as brave and charismatic. He was also known as a fancy dresser, so he gained the nickname the Dandy King, which I love. After the fall of Napoleon, he was captured by the forces of King Ferdinand IV of Naples and was eventually tried and sentenced to death by firing squad. When the time came, he refused a chair and a blindfold and said, "I have braved death too often to fear it." He then stood up tall and proudly and kissed a carving of the face of his wife that he had with him, and then he spoke his final words, which were, "Soldiers, do your duty, straight to the heart but spare the face. Fire." Honestly, I don't know how these people stay so calm and collected during these undoubtedly terrifying moments. In our number 6 spot today, we have Major Lloyd Williams. Major Lloyd Williams was born in 1887 and was an officer in the United States Marine Corps and passed away fighting in World War I. On June 11th of 1918, he was leading an assault and had been sent to help the French army in the Battle of Belleau Wood, which barely left anyone on their side alive. When they first arrived, they found the French retreating already, but Lloyd did not want to. When a French major told Lloyd to retreat, he told him to go to hell, which I guess I can appreciate. Later in the battle, Lloyd found himself gassed and injured by shrapnel and was down on the battlefield, severely injured. When medics approached him, he spoke his last words, which were, "Don't bother with me, take care of my good men." I obviously have no knowledge of what would have happened if they did choose to retreat, retreat when the French major suggested it, but I definitely think it is honorable that he ensured his men were tended to first. In our number 5 spot today we have Murray Hudson. Murray Hudson was born in 1938 and was a sergeant with the Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment. On February 13, 1974, Murray was a drill instructor and was supervising a training exercise when things really took a turn for the worst. One of the officers in training, or a non-commissioned officer who was participating in this training exercise, accidentally armed a grenade that he was about to throw. This is obviously an incredibly frightening situation and one that made the officer completely freeze. After all, what really do you do in that situation? Murray saw him freeze and realized what had happened and ordered him to throw it, which I guess is the smartest move and the thing that you would do in this situation. The officer unfortunately was still frozen and wasn't reacting, so in an attempt to save him, Murray went over and took his hand and tried to release the grenade so that he could throw it. During this process, the grenade unfortunately exploded, which took both of their lives. The final words of Murray were his directions and him saying, "Throw it, just throw it." Such a tragic event that absolutely could have been avoided. Murray was awarded the George Cross after his passing, which is the highest award bestowed by the British government for gallantry not in the presence of an enemy. In our number 4 spot today we have Louis Joseph de Montcalm. Louis Joseph was a French soldier who was born in 1712 and was commander of the forces in North America during the 7 Years' War. In September of 1759 he decided to attack the British with the forces he had instead of waiting for more people and more numbers. Many people believed that this was his greatest mistake, but he felt like if he waited, they wouldn't have been able to defeat the British. That may be true, but without waiting, the British of course still defeated the French forces. Louis was riding back to the city when he was struck by a musket shot in the back. There were 3 soldiers who helped him back to the city and to a surgeon who explained that he wouldn't be able to even make it through the night. Before his commanding officers left him for the last time, he had some not so nice words for them. His final words happened to be, "I have much business that must be attended to of greater moment than your ruined garrison and this wretched country." Considering he's talking about the country that I live in, that seems a little rude, but I can understand why he felt that way. In our number 3 spot today we have Simon Bolivar. Simon, who is often referred to as the Liberator, was born in 1783 and was a military and political leader that led Venezuela, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Panama to their independence from the Spanish Empire. He was 47 years old in 1830 and had resigned from his presidency and was planning on heading to Europe. He even had already sent crates of his belongings, but unfortunately fell extremely ill before he was able to leave his country. On December 17th of 1830, he was about to lose his battle with tuberculosis and was extremely delirious, so his last words are actually very strange. There are some accounts that his last words were, "Damn it, how will I ever get out of this labyrinth?" And other accounts say that his final words were, "Fetch the luggage, they do not want us here." Truthfully, either way, it is clear that he wasn't necessarily in his right mind, but it's also very clear that he was looking for some way out or some sort of escape. In our number 2 spot today we have John Sedgwick. John Sedgwick was born in 1813 and was a military officer and Union Army general during the American Civil War. On May 9, 1864, he and his men were at the Spotsylvania courthouse and he was directing different placements when Confederate sharpshooters, who were around 1,000 yards away, began shooting at them. This of course caused for some of John's men to duck for cover like any regular human being would when being shot at. I'm not exactly sure why, but John seemed to have been less concerned with the shots and more concerned with the soldiers taking cover, and he continued to strut around and say, "I'm ashamed of you. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance." It was unfortunately just a few moments later that he was fatally struck by a bullet just under his left eye. His chief of staff, Martin T. McMahon, was close to him and heard his last words and tried to catch him as he fell. Medical personnel were of course called as quickly as possible, but unfortunately he never regained consciousness. In our number 1 spot today we have Alexander Prochore. Bondarenko. In 2016, Alexander was a senior lieutenant with the Special Armed Forces of the Russian Armed Forces. He was 25 years old at the time and was fighting in the Syrian civil war. On March 17th of 2016, during the Palmyra offensive, he found himself surrounded by ISIS militants. Not wanting to be captured alive and also bravely doing what he thought was best, he ordered an airstrike on his location. His command was slightly confused in the beginning of this order and asked him to confirm his order, and this is when Alexander spoke his final words to command. He said, "They are outside. This is the end, Commander. Thank you. Tell my family and my country I love them. Tell them I was brave and I fought until I could no longer. Please take care of my family. Avenge my death. Goodbye, Commander. Tell my family I love them." Alexander left behind his wife Katya and the child they were expecting at the time of his death. He was nicknamed the Russian Rambo after his death and was awarded the title Hero of the Russian Federation for his ultimate sacrifice. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have Michael Ney. Michael Ney was a first Duke and he was the first Prince of the Moskva and was a French military commander in the French Revolutionary Wars as well as the Napoleonic Wars. He was even one of the original 18 marshals of the empire that Napoleon I created. After Napoleon was dethroned and exiled in 1815, however, Michael was arrested and tried by the Chamber of Peers for treason. When the verdict was given, 137 peers voted for the death penalty, 17 voted for deportation, 5 abstained, and there was one single vote for acquittal. Unfortunately, this was a majority rules situation, and Michael was sentenced to death by the firing squad. On December 7th, 1815, Michael was put in front of a firing squad and he refused to wear a blindfold. He was surprisingly given the right to order the fire himself, and before doing so, these are the final words that he spoke. "Soldiers, when I give the command to fire, fire straight at my heart. Wait for the order. It will be my last to you. I protest against my condemnation. I have fought 100 battles for France and not one against her. Soldiers, fire." I couldn't imagine having to be the one to order your own death, especially when you don't want to die, so this one definitely leaves quite an eerie feeling.
Number 9. Trench routine. During the more or less quiet moments of trench living, soldiers were attacked by snipers and shells still quite often. This was referred to as wastage. It's the reason 80 soldiers are killed in the trenches a month. Nighttime was of course the most dangerous, but also required the most labor. Soldiers would climb into no man's land to repair barbed wire or dig new trenches. Now during the day it was easier to spot oncoming attacks, sure, but at the same time soldiers were busy with chores. They would be filling sandbags, repairing duckboards, all below the surface, all out of view, still from snipers. It was extremely uncomfortable. Number 8. The Night Witches. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment was assembled out of women only. They had trained for bombing missions, but back then the planes were nothing like they are today. You had bombs held to the wings with wire. These planes didn't have radio or radar, and that was so these women could sneak behind German enemy lines and complete around 15 to 18 missions a night. The Germans referred to them as night witches. And when Nadia Popova, who enlisted at just 19 years old, when her home was taken by German soldiers, her town was also destroyed, and in July 1942, when she was shot down, she met another pilot who was also shot down, who she later went on to marry. So even when the world's chaos, still some good things end up happening. Good, with a grain of salt, I say. Number 7. Simon Bolivar. Simon Bolivar is often referred to as the Liberator. He was born in 1783 and he was a military and political leader that led Venezuela, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Panama to their independence from the Spanish Empire. He was 47 years old in 1830 and he had to resign from his presidency, and he was planning on heading to Europe. He even had already sent crates of his belongings beforehand, but sadly he fell extremely ill before he was able to actually leave. On December 17th of 1830, he was moments away from the end, and at that point humans become quite delirious, so his last words have stuck with many. Those last words were, "Damn it, how will I ever get out of this labyrinth?" Other accounts say his final words were, "Fetch the luggage, they do not want us here." Either way, whichever one is accurate, it sounds like Simon was sadly looking for a way out, even moments away from death. Number 6. Training exercises. Murray Hudson was born in 1938. He was a sergeant with the Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment. On February 13th, 1974, Murray was supervising a training exercise when one of the worst things that could happen, happened. One of the officers in training that day accidentally armed a grenade that he was about to throw, and the officer then froze out of fear. I can't even imagine at that point what that's like. Now Murray saw this and he knew right away what had happened, so he ordered the soldier to just throw it. Sadly, the officer was still frozen in fear, so in an attempt to save him, Murray went over himself and tried to release the grenade so that he could maybe throw it. Now during this process, the grenade unfortunately exploded, which took out both of the men. Now Murray was awarded the George Cross after his passing, which is the highest award bestowed by the British government for gallantry not in the presence of an enemy. Number 5. Lady Be Good. Back in 1943, a crew of 9 left Libya aboard the Lady Be Good. They left to complete a bombing run, but the harsh Sahara sandstorms forced most of the planes in that run to turn back and land. But not the Lady Be Good. She continued on for a while, but then eventually the crew decided to turn around and head back. But after that point, the crew and the plane were not seen until 1958. That's when British geologists found the remains, and then they were able to piece together the crew's last moments. They flew past the base, subsequently ran out of fuel, had to parachute into the desert, and while the plane crashed. From there, they decided to travel northwest for about 111 miles. They didn't make it during this hopeful trek, but if they'd gone the opposite direction for just 16 miles, they would have found the Lady Be Good, which was in better condition than any of them realized. Co-pilot Lieutenant Robert F. Toner kept a diary while they walked in the desert, and when it was found alongside his body, one of the final entries said, "Still waiting for help, still praying." Number 4. Hopeful last moments. While it's hard to hear that last diary entry of those who were left alone in the desert, we have to look at what it was like at the end of your life mid-battle. Sir Philip Sidney was born in November 1554, and he was an English poet and soldier and is one of the most prominent figures of the Elizabethan era. In 1586, he joined Sir John Norris in the Battle of Zutphen in the fight against the Spanish, but it was during this battle that he was shot in the thigh, which would ultimately lead to his death. One of the most well-known stories now about Sir Philip Sidney is when he was lying there wounded next to another soldier also wounded. He spoke his last words to that soldier and he gave him the rest of his own water. He said, "Take it, thy need is greater than mine." It seemed like these stories have a similar theme, that in the very last moments of your life, even if you know you're not going to make it, you put others' life before yourself. That's a life lesson to take home, folks. Number 3. Glowing aid. The Battle of Shiloh was one of the worst during the Civil War. 3,000 had met their fate while 16,000 others left injured. The wounded were so weak from traveling and not getting any proper rest that the infections that they had been living with at that point were starting to really take a toll on their well-being. Medics during this battle were completely overwhelmed. During the night hours, something odd happened and their wounds began to glow. Yeah, they called this the angel's glow, and if you had this glow, your survival chances were much higher. We found out why later on in 2001. The glow came from parasitic worms called nematodes who vomit bacteria, a glowing bacteria. That bacteria fights infections, so now we fully understand. Number 2. No Man's Land. I mentioned trench life earlier in this list, so naturally I have to expand on the patch in between those two trenches, No Man's Land. The Smithsonian says that there were tales circulating around those trenches over time, and apparently deserters lived in No Man's Land from both sides. They were said to dig tunnels deeper and deeper in the middle, and only at night would they come out to scavenge off of the dead. These tales began around 1920, when a British cavalryman, Ardern Arthur Holm Beeman, wrote about those German prisoners who would seemingly disappear into the trenches with other deserters. His officers then told them there won't be a search party because no living man shall be sent into the ghouls among the moldering dead. And finally, number 1. Interrogations. We'll finish this serious list off on a rather positive note. Hans Scharf was living in South Africa with his family, but when he visited Germany, that's when the war broke out. He then was drafted, but his wife convinced a general to not put him at the front lines, but instead with interpreters. After a handful of mistakes and these wild coincidences, Hans became the lead interrogator for the Allied pilots felled in France and Germany. His methods, though, changed history. When he was younger, he witnessed a prisoner get abused, so from that day on, he vowed to never do the same. So later on down the road, his interrogation methods revolved around using kindness and friendly banter. His method has been studied since, and it works even better. This way, whoever is on the other side leaks more information and nobody has to break any fingers. Once the war was over, Scharf testified against the Germans, moved to the States, and began a new career as a mosaic artist. His work is currently on display in Cinderella's castle at Disney World. And no, I'm not kidding.